social justice choir. We speak up against injustice through music. If you need someone to sing somewhere, you just want us in the crowd to sing a song you tell us to sing, reach out. Rise Up, Sing Out. She made a beautiful sign. So everyone is welcome anytime, singers, non-singers. We meet at 6:30 at First Unitarian Universalist. It's on Blanton Avenue every Wednesday. And if you look up Rise Up, Sing Out, we have a Facebook page. We're not super tech crazy, but we have Facebook. The first song we're going to sing is by Sarah Lynch Thomason. She wrote More Waters Rising. We thought it fitting, given the weather.
More waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more fires burning, they will find their way to me. There are more fires burning, this I know, this I know. There are more fires burning, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. There are more mountains falling, they will find their way to me. There are more mountains falling, this I know, this I know. There are more mountains falling, this I know. I will walk through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will wade through the waters when they find their way to me. I will wade through the waters, this I know, this I know. I will wade through the waters, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know. I will walk through the fires when they find their way to me. I will walk through the fires, this I know, this I know. I will walk through the fires, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains when they find their way to me. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know, this I know. I will rebuild the mountains, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know. There are more waters rising, they will find their way to me. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know.
Thank you for the audience participation. We're hoping for even a little bit more on this next song. This next song was written by Melanie DeMoore, and she shared it on YouTube. You can find her, and she wrote it the day after the election. And I am bringing up my cheat sheet because I need it. So, the chorus, which I'm hoping y'all will join in on as much as you are inclined, is you got to put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Okay? Yes, we're gonna sing them first. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Your turn. Gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. And that's 2 times every chorus. It's 2 repetitions of that. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Again, you gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Lift up your eyes. Lift up your eyes. Don't you despair. Don't you despair. Look up ahead. Look up ahead. The path is there. The path is there. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. I know you're scared. I know you're scared. And I'm scared too. And I'm scared too. But here I am. But here I am. Right next to you. Right next to you. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. And lead with love. And lead with love.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming out. I'm Dana. I'm Executive Director at an organization called Dogwood Alliance. This is the 5th stop of the Justice First Tour, which is a tour of 20 cities across 10 states across the southeastern U.S. with the goal of uniting and inspiring a grassroots solidarity movement focused on putting justice at the forefront of the message around all of our work. I want to start with just a moment of silence for Marcus DeVive Peters, who was an unarmed man killed by Richmond police on I-95 on Monday. Can we all just say his name? Marcus DeVive Peters. Marcus DeVive Peters. Thanks to Rise Up Sing Out for kicking us off this morning with words and songs of inspiration to fill our hearts as we begin the day of conversation about putting justice at the forefront of our conversation in the South. I want to thank our sponsors for the Justice First Tour stop here in Richmond. The New Alpha Community Development Corporation, Dogwood Alliance, and Sierra Club Ready for 100 are the regional and national partners that are working together to put this tour all across the region. And here in Richmond, I want to give a special shout out to Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, Virginia Union University, the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, the Virginia Civic Engagement Table, Virginia Organizing, First Consulting Alliance, Mothers Out Front, Hampton Roads, United Parents Against Lead, Virginia League of Conservation Voters, Equality Virginia, Virginia Conservation Network, New Virginia Majority, Chesapeake Climate Action Network, BAAD, Blazing Awareness Against Drugs, and last but not least, People Demanding Action. That is a beautiful group of organizations that have come together, representing a diverse array of issues and people, all working and fighting for the same thing, justice. I want to just briefly tell how I got to be on this tour. I'm a self-proclaimed tree hugger. The organization that I work for works to protect the forests and communities of the southeastern U.S. from destructive industrial logging practices. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, what we do to the forests of the world is a mirror reflection of what we are doing to ourselves and to each other. It's important for us to lift up our fellow non-human beings in this conversation. The birds, the bees, the bears, the trees. They don't speak human language. They can't vote. They don't own land. And they too are being oppressed. They too are experiencing tremendous injustice. The southeastern U.S. is the world's largest wood-producing region. We have a forest destruction rate from logging that is unmatched anywhere on this planet. And it's not just impacting the birds and the bees and the turtles and the trees, it's also impacting our most vulnerable communities. The rural communities of the South that are on the front lines of some of the highest logging rates on the planet are some of the poorest in our nation, with some of the highest poverty rates, lowest education rates, and highest unemployment rates. Why is this if we're the world's largest wood-producing region, that our communities that are at the ground zero of the logging that's happening are not thriving and prosperous? It's because of the system that we're all fighting is the same system that is controlling resources, that is controlling power, concentrating wealth and decision-making into the hands of a few by destroying the planet and doing it by exploiting the most vulnerable in our society. So when we talk about forests, we're also talking about justice. When we're standing for forests, we're not just standing for trees and birds, we're also standing for people, our fellow human beings. There are two myths that have really started to resonate with me as I've been on this tour with Reverend Leo Woodbury. One is the myth of race. The system has falsely taught us that we are different because of the color of our skin, but we are not. We are all human. The idea of race is a myth. Biologically, it does not exist. The other myth that they perpetuate is that people are separate from nature and that we can dominate nature and manipulate nature solely for our benefit. But what's really happening is that a few people are dominating and destroying nature for their own personal gain. A few people are getting really wealthy off destroying the planet. And it's gotten to the point now where the whole world is at risk. The climate is changing, and the floods are happening. And And our forests are a critical part of the solution, reimagining our relationship with nature. Forests pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Increasingly, scientists are recognizing that this is a critical part of slowing climate change. But they do even more than that. Forests also protect us from flooding. And right now, across the southeastern region, there's an acceleration of logging happening, where they are turning old growth wetland forests along the rivers of the coastal plain into wood pellets, and they're shipping them across the Atlantic to be burned in power stations as an alternative to fossil fuels. And they're calling it renewable and green. But it's the same old system. It's the same old destructive, dirty system. It is not green. It is not renewable. We need a regenerative economy that focuses on life-giving economy that puts humans in relationship with nature in a way that allows our planet to heal. So I'm here today because of this man that I'm about to introduce, Reverend Leo Woodbury. I met him at the People's Climate March last year, where he had mobilized 600 citizens living on the front lines of carbon pollution, other kinds of pollution, and the front lines of experiencing the worst effects of climate change, up to DC to march to demand that decision makers start putting people above profits. And we were there with our forest protection signs, and Reverend Leo insisted that we march with him in the frontline communities. And since that time, I have come to know Reverend Leo as a friend. We've shared stories, we've shared meals, we've shared walks in the woods. I've cried on his shoulder. And he has taught me that if we're going to solve these problems, that we have to put justice at the forefront of our conversation, that we have to be talking about the inequities of resources and power, and we have to be working to change that, whether we're fighting for forests, whether we're fighting for clean energy, whether we're fighting for gun control, whether we're fighting to stop police brutality. We're all fighting for the same thing. So it's my absolute honor to welcome Reverend Leo Woodbury, who is everybody's reverend, and who shows us and models every day what it means to be inclusive. Thank you.
Thanks to all you guys for coming out on a Saturday when you could be doing something else, right? But we're here for a very important reason at a very crucial time in our planet's history. A time that humanity has never faced before. Our communities are in peril. Our government is in peril. Democracy is in peril. The entire planet is in peril. And there has to be something that unites us. There has to be something that cuts through these lines of demarcation, that even though we are doing amazing work, blazing new pathways, leading people into new vistas and towards new horizons, we're still far too segmented, siloed, and separated. And all we have to do is look at our movement. And when we look at it, we see that we have environmental justice, climate justice, earth justice, creation care justice, economic justice, gender justice, reform of the criminal justice system. But the one thing that is in every issue area is the aspect of justice. That if we can create a big tent movement across the South and perhaps across this country, where we lift up justice first, then irregardless of your issue area, irregardless of your situation, we win. Because that's what this country supposedly was built on. That we should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That we all have stood up and said that we believe in liberty, equality, and justice. But that's not what's happening. So what we want to do, what we came together to hopefully put together across the South, is to create a huge tent under which we all can work under. And by building this huge tent, it's not just an idea, but if you study the movements that have taken place in this country, if you study the movements that have taken place around the world, it's only when we build a big tent and a platform that allows our work, regardless of whether it's direct action, whether or not it's making legislative advocacy or organizing, makes it bigger, makes it broader, makes it more inclusive, and makes it more powerful. The example I like to lift up is the civil rights movement. During the civil rights movement, like all other movements, people joined that movement for a variety of reasons. Some people simply want to marry someone of another race. Some wanted to live in a neighborhood that was segregated. Others wanted to be able to attend a school, eat at a lunch counter, pursue a career that was forbidden to them, run for elected office, or simply have the right to vote. But under that big tent, we all could gather. And what that did was create a platform so that when one person marches or one group marches in Richmond, Virginia, that every other justice-loving group marches with them. There's a reason why we're not winning the way that we should. The students who have marched because they want to do something about gun violence should be marching with the Black Lives Matter people who are fighting against gun violence. They should be marching with the people who are rising up because an unarmed black man was shot.
That's right.
They should be uniting with the victims of domestic violence when someone decides to shoot everyone in their home. Yeah. They should be marching with people when we have shootings at country western concerts or in movies or in churches, because it's all one battle, it's all one struggle. There's only one way to win, and that's by putting justice first. We can build a wall of solidarity in the South. We can see the South rise again. Yeah. This is our time. This is our moment in history. As we like to say in the church, be not deceived. Things are not as bad as they would have us believe, because in just 16 months or more, millions of people across America have taken to the streets with the Women's March and the People's Climate March and the Scientists March, and all of these marches. We're mobilizing, we're organizing, we're building strength. All we need is unity to win. All we need to do is what? Let me hear you say it. Justice first. Justice first. Justice first. We need justice everywhere. We need it in our economy. We need it in our rural areas. We need it with our forests, because everything is interconnected. We're not separated from nature. When they cut down the trees and the floods come as they did in Marion, South Carolina, just last year, and you have people who lose their homes because they're on fixed incomes, because they get SSI, and I've never seen an SSI check for more than $600 a month. And so they can't afford to pay homeowner insurance. So when the flood comes, they can't rebuild their homes. They have to move in with their children, or perhaps go to a nursing home. That is not justice.
That's right.
That's right.
So we have to preserve our forests and our trees. We have to move away from fossil fuel. We have to unite in West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina to stop the Atlantic Coast pipeline. We no longer will live in a society that puts profit over people, that allows children to die from asthma because of pollution or the rollback environmental regulation. We can't be quiet. We can't sit still, because the planet is going to hell in a handbasket. And I don't know about you, I'm not going to stand for it. I'm not going to stand the church, amen? We're gonna have an ask for you. Because we want to build a base, we want to build a platform so that when you want to do work in Richmond, you turn out people. Just like today, even more. When you want to do work in Virginia, we turn out people. When we want to do work across the South, we turn out people. I'll share with you my vision for next year. Next year, sometime between January and May, I would love to see all of us on the tour, irregardless of our issues, go to our state capitals and have a day where we call for justice first, legislation and policy, and not policy and legislation that helps and empowers the rich, but instead remembers the least among us, the middle class among us, every single one of us, because we are all united for justice first. So thank you for your work. Thank you for your commitment. The battle is not over, but the victory is always. Thank you.
Yes!
Justice first. Thank you, Reverend Leo Woodbury. Justice first. I'm going to ask the panelists to come up, please. Sister Queen Bakira Shabazz. Is Christian Reed in the house?
Yeah.
Come on up, please, Christian. Just us. Justice. Justice first. I'm Queen Zakia Shabazz. Pronoun me. I'll be your moderator this morning, this afternoon, this rainy Saturday afternoon. On this leg of the Justice First tour. So let's get started. Our panelists today, we're going to be talking about criminal justice, environmental justice, LGBTQIA justice, and academia, higher education justice, or injustices in those areas. The particular justice that I fight for personally is United Parents Against Lead. We advocate on behalf of children who have been poisoned by lead, and particularly those who are drinking leaded water in public schools, in their homes. We want to prevent another Flint. Going to ask a question of our panelists. Asking each one of you to briefly introduce yourself. I believe the mic is on here. And the first question is, what does the intersection of your, are you joining us, brother? Thank you. With anyone else, we have another seat. Anyone else brave enough to come on up? What's your name, sir?
Rodney Hunter.
Rodney Hunter, welcome. And what would be your justice area, Brother Hunter?
Yeah, living wage, Medicaid expansion, housing.
Okay, great, excellent. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to start down here with my sister, Bakira Shabazz. Please introduce yourself briefly and tell us what justice, your justice area, and answer the question. This is the question for the panelists. What does the intersection of your justice area or areas and justice look like?
Okay, see if I can remember that by the time I finish my little spiel. As Sister Shabazz said, my name is Bakira Shabazz. I am the founder and CEO of First Alliance Consulting Firm, a communal-based consulting business that focuses on community issues and solving those issues with community members. I am also employed by Virginia Conservation Network as a climate organizer, which I'm extremely happy about, coming over into environmentalism after spending 20 years doing criminal justice advocacy reform. Seeing the intersections between the two and being able to make those correlations is very important to me when it comes to fighting for marginalized and impacted communities and peoples. So I'm also a member of the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative and the Virginia Prisoners of Conscience group that focuses on prison reform and amplifying prisoners' voices from within. Can I get that question one more time, Sister Shabbat?
Yes, ma'am. What does the intersection of your issue area or areas and justice look like? What does the intersection of your areas and justice look like?
For me, growing up in downtown Newport News and finding out really late in my life the environmental hazards that myself and my family was exposed to, I was devastated. And the fact that so many others did not know made me even more furious. Having a son that is disabled from chronic severe asthma, another who suffers with chronic bronchitis, and another that suffers from exercise-induced asthma, and seeing the economic hardships that I had to go through as a single parent, and not having a government that was being responsible to inform me, since they exposed me and my family to these elements, made me want to start to do more. And once you start putting out this information, and it's important that you be with a group of people, because I was a lone wolf, and so I was an easy target as I started to expose these injustices in my communities. And when I mean a target, I mean police started coming, fake charges started to come in. It was, and still is, horrible. So when people tell you these stories about they're now being a target, don't be so dismissive to what they're saying and thinking that they're going nuts. It is really, really happening. People are being targeted for exposing the truth. And so it's important that we surround people who are willing to take these risks and stand up for them. So what justice would look like for me is having a responsible government that is going to be transparent in every way possible and don't feel like there's anything that they cannot share with the public, because we all bear these burdens together. And so we are stakeholders in not only the state of Virginia and in the cities that we live in, but in the nation. So by saying you try to keep me from something is not responsible. We are all adults, and we all have to put into ensuring that we have a planet that is sustainable, that we have education, food, and everything else that we all need to be okay.
Thank you, Sister Bakura. Christian Reed.
Hi, my name is Krista. Thanks so much for having me here. I teach at Virginia Commonwealth University in a kind of interdisciplinary general education program. And when I'm not at VCU, I spend a lot of time working in what I will reluctantly call criminal justice reform, and I'll talk about that reluctance in a second. I've worked as a volunteer service provider in reentry since about 2009, and I worked for a number of years starting in about 2010 or 2011 as a teacher in correctional institutions. So I taught at the old Richmond City Jail, and then when we migrated to the new Richmond City Justice Center, I followed the programs through over to that new facility. And so there's a lot of things I could say about how criminal justice reform fits into what we're talking about here today. And I think I want to start a little bit by talking about scale, but also about the ways that we become enculturated to a system of incarceration. So I think probably we already know in this room that we incarcerate in the US the largest number of people that are incarcerated in the world. And that's true for just raw numbers and for percent population. We have about 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. And I think when you incarcerate a quarter of the people in the world, you actually live in an environment in which carceral systems become functionally invisible. Even if you feel actually really attuned to that system, even if you feel opposed to that system, you live in an environment built structurally around this system. So when I teach this on campus, the example I give my students who come into a diverse public urban university. They feel very like politically progressive. They feel kind of like woke. You know, they come into class and they're like, you can't tell me about prisons, Dr. Reed. And I'm like, okay, so I think probably we're politically aligned. But I actually think Virginia's incarceration system is functionally invisible to you. And the one way that's maybe makes this most materially real for my students is when I tell them that every single piece of furniture at VCU, and in fact in any state institution in Virginia, any state college or university, but also in our legislative buildings, is built by incarcerated labor in our state. And from my perspective, that means that's built by enslaved labor, because we in the state of Virginia don't pay people for their work while they are incarcerated. And so for my students, that's sometimes a little bit hard to internalize, because they see themselves as politically opposed to incarceration. They see themselves as politically opposed to enslavement of other humans. But actually, these are things that we are so enculturated to that we live with them every day. We sit in those chairs, we eat off those tables. It's actually part of our actual life. It's part of our life. We've all become really dependent on it. And so I think one of the things I want to contribute to today's conversation is to encourage us to find emotional and psychological space to actually understand the real scale of the problem in the US. We don't just incarcerate on a mass scale. We actually have an institution in the United States that is unprecedented in human history. And I think that's really, really important to understand. So just this week, the Vera Institute, which I love, they do great research on incarceration policy. They take a really progressive stance on criminal justice reform. They released a report indicating that we've seen about a 1% decrease in our incarceration rates over the last couple of years. And this is the kind of report that puts me in a position of not knowing how to respond socially. Because on the one hand, any one individual that I could keep out of a prison, I would, right? Like I would sort of, as a person, do anything to keep any person out of a prison. And 1% of people at our incarceration rates is actually a huge number of people. But I think that we can get trained to see something as reform that is actually quite regressive. And I think a 1% decrease in our incarceration rates is just profoundly insufficient. I think for us to even say that we were moving towards a reasonable scale of decarceration, and I think this is going to sound like many people, even people working in criminal justice reform would say that this is going to sound a little extreme, but I think we would have to start by looking at a 50% decrease. I think if we could cut our incarceration levels in half today, I would then feel comfortable saying, okay, now we simply incarcerate too many people. So I think a little bit I want us to kind of like work on understanding what our scale is and work on where we are. And to get to this question about how I see criminal justice reform relating to the question of justice is I think precisely because criminal justice reform has the word justice and reform in it, is we can be given things under the banner of reform that we should not be accepting. So I'll give one quick example and then I'll move on. And you'll cut me off if I run too long, right?
Yeah.
Because I get started on prisons and I tell you what, it's like never over. So just this year, out of this legislative session, Governor Northam signed legislation that raised the felony threshold in Virginia from $300 to $500. So felony larceny in Virginia is now at $500. And for some people, this was celebrated as reform. We increased our felony threshold. No, I think that this is unacceptable as reform for two reasons. Number one, $500 is still too low, way too low. Still some of the lowest in the nation. Second, this was a compromise deal set with the more conservative wing of our leadership in Virginia that campaigned to tie probation to repayment of restitution. So probationary officers in the state of Virginia are now empowered to collect restitution to the state or to victims as part of a condition of probation. Restitution can be thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. People who are released from prison are not permitted to drive, and they face really severe restrictions in employment and housing. So what this functionally does is it places people exiting carceral institutions in Virginia on a perpetual state of probation that they are not empowered to escape. And because probation creates opportunities for incarceration by criminalizing otherwise legal behavior like missing a drug test, missing a probationary appointment, not getting a job, we're actually putting those people at perpetual risk of reincarceration. And because completion of probation is a prerequisite for voting rights in the state of Virginia, we are perpetually disenfranchising people through this system. So this reform that we have gotten this year from our legislative offices is actually a profound win for our carceral state and a profound loss for any campaign for reform. So I want to encourage us as we think today about how our issues are related to also think about how we get these reforms that are really marketing for the same systems that we already have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christian Reed. Next up is V. Lamnick.
Thank you.
Yes.
I am honored to be on this panel with some exciting people who are doing incredible work in the community. So thank you. It's an honor to be here with all of you as well. I am the Deputy Director of Equality Virginia. Equality Virginia is a statewide LGBT organization working for fairness in Virginia. So we are based in Richmond, but we do statewide advocacy work. A lot of people who know us think about the work that we do in the General Assembly. And in a lot of ways, it feels really inaccessible to folks. Most of us, I think, and I will speak for myself too, before I started Equality Virginia 5 years ago, my understanding of kind of like the legislative process was about Schoolhouse Rock level, right? You know, how the song about how the bill becomes the bill. So it's a challenge to invite people to become engaged in the legislative process. And a lot of our work is providing people with the tools that they need to find their voice, to feel comfortable and empowered to speak truth to their power at the General Assembly. It is perfectly legal right now in Virginia to be fired or not hired for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And I do education and trainings across the state, and most people are surprised by that and think that protections are already in place to protect gay and transgender people, not only from protections in the workplace, but also you can be denied housing or kicked out of an apartment for being gay or transgender. You can be kicked out of a public space for being gay or transgender. So there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of misconception and a lot of lack of education around the protections that are in place. What's exciting is that most people believe that you should be protected on the basis of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. Most people believe that you should be able to provide a living for your family, put a roof over your family's head. And a lot of that has to do with our shared kind of American values. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is really focusing on elevating trans visibility. Right now in America, there are studies that show that about 9 out of 10 people know somebody who is lesbian or gay or bisexual. In fact, if everybody raised their hands in this room, I'm sure we'd see quite a percentage of people, right? Right? Awesome. If we did the same, we could say the number of hands would be very different if I asked how many people know somebody who's transgender. And that's about 1 out of 10 nationally, actually. So you all are doing much better than this. So a lot of our work is to increase trans visibility because we know that the more people who support trans issues, who know somebody who's trans, will then support trans issues. And we saw that with the lesbian and gay movement, right? So we know that a lot of people now know somebody who identifies as being lesbian or gay, and we see there being a lot more support for the lesbian and gay community. We don't have that level of support for the trans community. So a lot of our work is focused on elevating the voices and the stories of transgender people. One of my favorite programs that we do at Equality Virginia is our Transgender Advocacy Speakers Bureau program. It is comprised of trans folks from across the state of Virginia with varying identities, who are veterans or who are people of color, who are mothers, who are IT professionals all across Virginia, and they simply go into mostly faith communities actually and share their stories. So they're not doing a gender identity 101, they are simply saying, hey, my name is Max, I am an advocate for great food, I ran a marathon last year, I just published a book of poetry, and I'm also transgender. And guess what? I'm your neighbor. I go to that Kroger up the street. I go to your church, et cetera, et cetera. So really helping to grow understanding and support for the trans community simply by getting to know another person. We are bound by our stories, I think, as humans. And so that's a big part of that program. So yeah, I could go on and on, I think, but I'm going to pass the microphone.
Thank you. Dee Laminate. And next up is Travis Williams. Welcome, Travis.
Thank you. So I'm Travis Williams. I teach sociology at VCU. I'm an environmental sociologist. I teach classes on environmental racism. I also teach broader classes just on sociology. But here today, what I wanted to talk about just briefly actually came in part out of some conversations I had with my friend Bakura just about general issues of justice, academia, social inequality, etc. And since it's such a broad area, there's really just kind of three things I'm going to try to touch on. One, I'm going to talk about the model of the neoliberal university and the social violence that is attached to that. I'm also going to talk about the whiteness of the environmental humanities and social sciences really briefly. And then I want to talk a little bit about just thinking about justice critically and kind of the role that the university can play in that. So really quickly, since neoliberalism is sort of a really loaded term, what I'm talking about when I say neoliberalism is actually borrowing from a guy named David Harvey who wrote a lot of books on it. But just kind of in a nutshell, just talking about kind of mass deregulation, privatization, corporatization, the systematic withdrawal of the state from public sectors, and entrepreneurialism is kind of a core societal ideology, and the whole idea of kind of creating private markets for public goods. And in the context of the university, some of the things that are sometimes associated with this, just if you think generally about the kind of corporatization of everything, as I said before, mass privatization, withdrawal of the state, increasing financial burdens on student families, increasingly vulnerable faculty, and a lot of increased pressure, productivity pressure of various kinds, whether it's research, teaching, legitimacy, validation, etc. Ever-increasing class sizes, larger student-teacher ratios, aggressive administration expansion, racialized educational inequality, the kind of systematic abandonment of the liberal arts, aggressive pursuit of narrow, sort of STEM-focused fields, which aren't bad fields, but I'm thinking just about the broader dynamics. As well as the displacement of, increasing displacement of critical oppositional thinking by more productive, efficient thinking. So that's just sort of a starting point. And one of the general ideas that I just want us to think about in this conversation, which I think connects to a lot of other things. I think we have a lot of overlap in what we're talking about today, all of us, is that it's important for us to acknowledge, confront, and constructively challenge the complicity of the contemporary neoliberal university model with racial, cultural, and economic violence, and also to connect these institutional forms of marginalization and oppression with broader societal patterns of racial, cultural, economic violence within which the contemporary neoliberal university functions. And these include environmental inequality, environmental racism. So those were two at the top. One of the topics, the first of the tri-parts I think I'm trying to do here. So I also wanted to mention too, transdisciplinary whiteness and critical knowledge in the environmental humanities and social sciences. And that came largely from just my experiences at various conferences, especially large conferences around my discipline and so on, and concerns about the lack of diversity expressed even within the fields themselves in a lot of the environmental sort of humanities. And what was interesting to me, one of the experiences that I had, is that there was a survey that was given to a large section of a professional organization that's associated with my field, and they kind of admitted that there was this diversity problem that, and I noticed it too, just every year I'd be in the room and there'd be maybe 100 people, and there's one or two African Americans, and this is also happening even as studies of minority issues and environmental issues are increasing, not really seeing a parallel expansion of experts, scholars, teachers with that increasing emphasis on racial diversity. There's also continued marginalization of indigenous and ethnic studies perspectives, as well as non-white scholars within these environmental fields. And one of the responses to a survey that was given by a lot of people who were part of this section, including very successful people, was that they were kind of very dismissive of the racial issue. They felt like, well, there's racism everywhere, why is this important? Or I'm not a person person of color, I can't even really answer these survey questions. And there's also been within my field kind of a documented pattern of minority students who will enter the field but then kind of fall off, or they end up going into other fields as well. And so that's just something that's an experience that I've had, because it also raises the question of, what does it mean, or what might be the implications if we don't really have necessarily diversity at the level of expertise, authority, etc., even as we're expanding studies and analyses of marginalized groups. And so environmental inequality, environmental racism, these kind of remain enduring problems, even as the study of these problems increases within the academies, within the universities, for a variety of reasons. We don't really see a lot of parallel diversity. And I can say a lot more about those things, and I'm happy to if people have more specific questions like, what do I mean when I say this term, or what exactly am I referring to when I speak about patterns. But in terms of justice, I think one thing that I would like to have some time to do today is to think about what we mean by justice, and what kinds of justice are we interested in pursuing. And that comes in part from being influenced by one of my colleagues, whose name is Jill Harrison. She's not really around here, but she's someone I went to graduate school with out in California, in Santa Cruz, where I did my graduate work. And she did a lot of research on the environmental justice movement, and really trying to highlight how folks involved in the EJ movement aren't just pointing out kind of, is justice there or not, but they're also oriented towards particular ideas of justice and challenging dominant ideas of justice that may actually not be all that progressive when we really start unpacking it. So one thing I've always been interested in, not just from an academic perspective, but just as someone who's also been involved with community projects and so on, is to think about, what do we mean by justice? What kinds of definitions of justice are we interested in? And rather than thinking about this idea of we either have justice or we don't, but to really think also, what sorts of justice are we interested in pursuing, and what sort of dominant ideologies do we see functioning in terms of what people seem to be either saying explicitly or implicitly? What are they implying is justice? And are these types of justice that we're interested in? And what kind of unique contributions can the EJ movement and other social justice movements make towards really thinking critically about the kinds of justice agendas that we want to pursue, and also challenging existent agendas that maybe either claim or imply some sort of notion of justice and fairness that may not always be aligned with the ultimate goals that we're interested in. So yeah, I hope we can talk more about these things, and I look forward to the discussion.
We certainly will. We're going to have audience Q&A after the second question. Thank you so much, Travis Williams. And next up is Rodney Hunter.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a special thanks to Kendall for inviting me. My name is Rodney Hunter. I'm a minister at Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church, and also just come on board as co-director of Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. And also, I guess, since I'm a preacher, Kendall told me I got 2 minutes, so let me use my 2 minutes well. I want to thank Reverend Leo for talking about justice first, on justice focus, and also I want to acknowledge Dr. Boykin Sanders in the back, professor here at Virginia Union. You were talking about justice. For me, and I wrote down justice. For me, defining justice, I was saying justice for me is rectifying the gross social inequities of the disadvantaged. It puts an end to the conditions that produce injustice. The oppressed are raised, and the oppressors are judged. This country has never been about justice for all. And to me, that's why it's such an important issue, and that's why we have to fight so hard on it. And we are still dealing, I think the professor said it, the issue of slavery. It's still slavery. Slavery made life easy for the few, and that's just institutional slavery. And for me, that's why when you ask me, I said a living wage for all. I think our jails, incarceration comes from people with lack of funds. When we talk about dignity and the quality of life and making sure persons can feel good about taking care of their children. How can you have dignity when you're making $7 an hour? When you have no health benefits? That's why Medicaid expansion is a part of what I think is important for the issue of justice. And you can't talk about, it's something about, Noam Chomsky, I think, made it clear when he talked about this country wants to manufacture what they call consent, make you think that it's your fault because you're in the situation you're in. No, it's systemic, and that's what we're all saying. That means we do have to come together. We all have to come together for issues, not just my issue, but all issues. I think we have to come together to make sure that we win this battle that's fought with money on one hand, and so many of us are so overworked when it comes to the poverty area that we just can't always be everywhere all the time. But more of us can be in the battle. That's why for me, being a minister and being with the Interfaith Center plays a part, because when you talk about not knowing the parliamentary issues and not knowing all of the issues of the General Assembly, but there are people who do know. And if we can come together with those who do know, and they can educate us, then we can fight. And that's why, to me, that's why I'm here, to make sure that we end this oppressive system of keeping people down. The minorities, immigrants, and then look how they divide us. We're so divided. We need to come together and let them know that power does belong to the people. We're paying salaries to persons when they get in office, they become filthy rich. And then tell us why. Well, why do they need health care? This is absurd. And to me, that's why I'm here to say that, yes, I will fight until death. And we talk about fighting war somewhere else, and we don't have any kind of justice and freedom in our own country. So I'm here for that. The living wage piece, Medicaid expansion, incarceration, everything ties in. So I'm here to say that I'm with you in this fight for justice, and I'm willing to not just talk about it, but I'm willing to put any resources I have and to make physical sacrifices, because if we're talking about the next generation, we need to set an example for them. That's why.
Our next and final question before we take questions from the audience is, what would it look like to put justice first and work in greater solidarity across issues?
What would it look like to put justice first? That is a complex question depending on who you are. And I had a conversation about inclusion and equity. And I was on a conference call and I was talking about the issues that my people face. And the Spanish young lady said to me, well, you're not being very inclusive. And she was absolutely right. But I couldn't be, because my people are facing so much peril and we are dying every day. And it seems like this country could not care less about every day that somebody else in the street dead. And other cultures are not experiencing that. So my exclusion is not deliberate. It's just that I have to deal with what's going on with my people right now. And I don't know what's going on with other people's issues. And so if I don't know, I can't even lend a hand. So what we all have to do, as the Reverend said, because every inhumane issue is all of our issues, is that we can't assume that somebody is being a said thing or unsaid thing until we bring them an issue and then they turn their backs on it. And so I encourage people, when we're talking about justice first, is to be open to all issues and all scenarios, and to keep in mind that just because you're going through a certain thing, you can't expect everybody else to know what it is. So if there is an issue, bring it to the forefront and allow people to work those issues. Not every black person is going through the same issues. I happen to be a victim of the system. My story is a lot different than probably a lot of other African Americans in environmentalism. And that is hard for me because I am the different one. And I can't tell my story for fear of being shut down, fired, all of that type of stuff. And so I have to carry this burden by myself. And so I'm also encouraging people and employers to be mindful of the life experiences that people have had. You know, some people, college wasn't an option. Doesn't mean that they're less smart or less innovative or don't have anything to bring to the table. You know, college is not the only place you can be educated. There's libraries that are free that will teach me the same thing and cost me a lot less money than going to school. All I need is a syllabus, and I can go study it myself. I won't get your paper degree, but I still will know exactly what you know, if not more. And so we live in these boxes. It's time to start tearing down these boxes and supporting one another, listen to people's stories, being empathetic to these things and understanding that the system is what is against us, and it's not us that's against the other people. The system wants us to be infighting. That's what they pride themselves off of. That is how they're able to continue to make money. That's how they're able to continue to push wars, by fear. Fear drives everything. When we look at what's going on with white people calling the police on black people today, I had to sit down and think, why are they so afraid of us? What have we done that white people would be so afraid of our mere existence when we pose absolutely no threat? And if you look back into our history, we are not a vicious people. So what is it that you are scared of? And then I thought about it. And it's the fear that was drove down by government systems to make people think that they are vicious, they are always in jail, they're going to rob you, they're going to rape you. All of these type of things came down from slavery, Jim Crow, to right now. Slavery is not gone. Those same fears, they're still instilling in people right now with incarceration. You know, and by, if you have a system and you're saying that 33% of this system is filled with this type of people, then people start thinking, well, obviously those people must be bad. Outside of thinking about variables, you know? So I encourage people to be critical thinkers for one. Don't listen to what everybody tells you. Have your own independent, free mind and hold that and cherish that. And don't let nobody take your choice away from you. God said He gave us free will. That means we will always have the choice to do either right or wrong. Can't nobody take that from you. Guard that choice with your life and do what's right with it. We have a charge to be humans to one another. And that's the first charge. And we can't talk about justice if we can't get over these barriers that separate us. And that is number one. We are human first. That construct of race was governmental. You and I are the same people. We bleed the same. We feel the same. Everything. I hate the construct of race. There was nothing we could do about what color we came out as. Absolutely nothing. You're just lighter than me, but we the same people. Some folks just darker than me, but we the same people. That's it. If we start to break down these confines and say to the government, we're not going to allow you to tell us who we are. And if you can say that I'm black, then I can say that I'm something else. If you got the power to define who I am, I got the power to denounce that and redefine who I am.
That's it.
And we have to do that. It is a must. The government has implanted fear, and rightfully so, we should be scared with what we're seeing. FBI kicking down people's houses with this black identity extremist crap. All of these things, you know, is fear. But together, it's always more of us than it is them. And I want you all to always remember, it's always more of us than it is them.
Strength and unity. Go ahead, Christian.
So I think I want to touch on a couple of things you said. You talked about breaking down boxes, and I really like that call for us to have a little bit more unity across the areas in which we work. There's probably a lot of different causes that have brought everybody here today, and one of our charges today is to talk a little bit about the things that unify those causes. And I think that Travis did a great job of talking about how private interests have really colonized government to lead to the kind of structures that you're talking about here, right? They're building a government that serves not the needs of the people, which would include all of us, but just the needs of a really small core center of corporate interests. So I think one of the ways that plays out, it really interestingly is in Travis's area of research, which is environmental justice with this like understanding of critical race theory as we look at our environmental movement. So we know that people of color bear the brunt of environmental injustice, and we also see that in our kind of like public movements, often white voices are amplified when we talk about environmentalism. And I think that can have some really unexpected and damaging effects that I see play out in the area of criminal justice. So I'll give an example from here in Virginia. In the southwest corner of Virginia, there's a really small town called Big Stone Gap. It's a coal mining town. We have a little museum to coal history there. They were once named the mineral capital of Virginia. And as in many, many, many coal towns in the southeast of the United States, this is a city that was devastated environmentally by the coal industry, devastated economically and socially by the coal industry, and left with nothing once coal was gone. And so this is a site that's a great place for exploring exactly the kind of environmental issues that you opened us with today, right? Thinking about how rural, low-income communities are disproportionately subject to a lot of the environmental damage that we see with the way that we consume resources here in the United States. So what happened in the 90s is Governor George Allen took a look at some of these small coal towns in Southwest Virginia and said, I have an idea. We can make money again off of this kind of devastation. And so he met with developers, he met with private incarceration interests, he met with policymakers who are really closely tied to these corporate interests, and they decided that these cities that had already been traumatized once could be re-traumatized through the prison system. And they marketed that as a jobs opportunity. So Governor Allen went to Big Stone Gap and he said, we're going to solve these problems, we're going to bring you jobs, and we're going to do it in a maximum security facility. We're going to bring you a prison that is going to employ all of you. And at that time, there were civil rights activists, there were nuns actually, who came to Big Stone Gap and said, we don't want this prison, actually, this is not how we want a community to make money. And people were so desperate that they really turned very, very violently against the people who spoke out against the prison. And you can actually see how all of these corporate interests converged. There was infrastructure in Big Stone Gap to cap mountains, and so what they did was they took a mountain and they capped it. And instead of extracting coal out of that mountain, they put a prison on the top. And they said it's perfect, it's largely inaccessible to the outside world because it's at the top of the mountain. This is a high security facility. Now, as it turned out, we didn't need a high security facility in Virginia. We couldn't fill it. We didn't, even with our exceptionally harsh policies and exceptionally high incarceration rates. Am I at time? Yeah. Oh, sorry. So I think these things are really tied together. I think if we had had environmental justice advocates there, we could have fought that prison if we had been highlighting race. But we didn't. So.
Thank you. And I just want to remind our panelists of the question. that's on the floor. What would it look like to put justice first and work in greater solidarity across issues? Go ahead, B.
Thank you. Before we got started, I was sitting beside Reverend Hunter, and we were chatting a little bit about each other's work, and he was telling me a little bit about the work that they're doing to focus on Medicaid expansion. And as a person doing advocacy work in the gay and transgender community, you know, it's so important to think about what it looks like to work across these different fields and to highlight the work that groups like his are doing. And so, yes, as a state agency working to get protections for gay and transgender people codified in our Constitution, to bring equality for gay and transgender Virginians. A big part of that is Medicaid expansion. We know that LGBT people are disproportionately affected by discrimination in healthcare. We know that LGBT people are disproportionately incarcerated. We know that we need to work across all of these lines. It's not just a single issue when it comes to LGBTQ advocacy, and we need to work across all of these different areas to bring justice for the community.
Thank you.
In terms of working kind of across different boundaries, focusing on justice and how justice can unite various groups versus divide them. I think one concept, or at least one area that's often, I think, projected or depicted as being super divisive, it's really not, is the idea of racial justice. And I say that because when I work with my students, it's probably, they teach me probably more than anything else when I'm actually teaching, interacting with students, or really, you know, with young folks in general. And one of the things that we talked about, because a lot of times, one of the things that we sort of highlight in our discussions is the role of structural racism, institutional racism, and how the power of white racism makes it unique among other kinds of racial discrimination. And the thing is that I think oftentimes we do highlight the damage that colonialism, white racism has done to minorities, but it's also important to keep in mind that white racism itself has done a tremendous amount of damage to white people as well. And I think even if you look around at some of the things that are happening, at the kinds of fear, the kinds of paranoia, the kinds of reactionary movements that we see with white nationalism and white identity. And I was inspired to this largely by writers like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, who had really interesting and intriguing ways of engaging race and racism, not just talking about kind of white victors and then people of color, they're oppressed, but also looking at what colonialism and white racism has done to white identity. And when you see these kind of bizarre orientations, even towards racism, towards others, the fear and the strangeness of that fear. And it's like Toni Morrison said, it looks crazy. Racism looks crazy when you really look at it. And I think that even though there have been so many social movements that have often kind of crumbled and become divided over issues of, especially race and gender, I know that was a huge one in the anti-toxic movement in the 80s, they fell apart over those two issues. I think if we really realize that a lot of the social ills that we see, it's not just that they affect some people. There may be some people who are more overtly and explicitly impacted, but it's really toxic to everyone. And I think focusing on how we can all benefit, for example, by addressing and fighting racial violence, institutional racism, that it's not just about focusing on one group, but that we all suffer from these things in various different ways, even in ways that may not always be highlighted. I think that can be a powerful way to organize and to take issues which maybe often appear like, oh, that's divisive. If you look at that, then how are we going to come together? And don't focus on that, because they always divide us with that. We need to understand that these things are toxic for everyone. And think white supremacy, white racism, discrimination, classism, gender phobia, transphobia, fear of different bodies, etc. That these are damaging to everyone. It's not just damaging to so-called minority groups, etc. But yeah, I'm very interested in that issue in general and how to kind of unite people, especially over issues that have historically divided social movements. Because I think those issues are false areas of division, that we actually share a lot of common faith. Even while recognizing tremendous inequalities there are certain elements of these problems that really are bad for everyone, even when they appear to advantage a certain group in the short term.
Reverend Rodney Hunter.
I thought the universities were supposed to teach us truth so we wouldn't discriminate with each other. But let me say that I think with religion, I think you can kind of see, look at this issue and see how divisive. If you look at all the denominations we have, and look at the issues that we divide ourselves on, right? We divided ourselves years ago on some didn't want women to preach, or now the issue of gay rights. All of these things, the churches are splitting now. But when you talk about solidarity, to me, even though we all will have different ways of thinking about issues, still the key issue of justice, the rights of every person, whether I agree with every doctrine or not, I can fellowship with any denomination and any religion. And it's educational. I don't have to be a Hindu to want to worship with Hindus or Muslim, but I don't have to separate myself either. Because they too have something in common with me, that we're all looking for truth and looking for some kind of justice. So why can't we come together? Some of us just have different ways that we want to express worship. To me, that's important for me when it comes to solidarity. And I think Reinhold Niebuhr said something in 1932 about the paradox of group dynamics. Why is it that if a group forms, they form for good intentions and purposes, but then they start to say, my group is better than your group? That's where the problem comes in. We start wanting to judge who's best, who's right, who's wrong. It's not about who's right, it's just how we live our lives and the way we choose. And I think we can still choose our way of living and still come together to fight for the bigger issues for the betterment of humanity and society. To me, that's how we can come together to bring justice to our nation.
Wonderful. Before we take questions from the audience, I want to remind everyone that we do have tables outside. I encourage everyone to stop by those tables, get some information, make donations so that the Justice First Tour will continue even beyond the scheduled stops that we have now. Thank you all for being here. We have time for a few audience questions, or maybe 2 or 3. Who has a question?
So an excellent event. It was really exciting to be here and informative. I'm an organizer, I'm a public education organizer, and a lot of what has been said resonates with my experience. One of the things I felt excited that the people who started us off talked a lot about putting people over profits, because I think that if we're gonna come together, part of what we're gonna have to recognize is that there's people who benefit, who profit off of us being separated. And so that justice is actually going to require a fight against people who are profiting. And so I'm curious if the panelists could speak about that dynamic, about fighting against those who are profiting from injustice and what that looks like. But there's this other piece that I'll just say really quickly. In my experience, what we see then is the people who make money off of injustice also then fund a lot of the social service agencies and fund a lot of nonprofits. And they suck up the most active people. They give you funding so you fight on like a single issue basis. And that our ability to come together and fight for justice isn't just because we're not convinced of it in the kind of sphere of ideas. It's because the people who are creating the injustice also try to control the social movement apparatus. And I'm curious if people have confronted that and how we deal with that.
Any particular panelist or whoever wants to address it?
I can try to answer that. It's always been profit over protection when you look at corporate interests. And for myself and a lot of the groups that are here today, when you look at the pipeline, first of all, people have been fighting corporate, like Dominion, forever. The classes and egregious policies that come out of these corporations, you would just would have to think that they, after they get off work, they beam themselves up somewhere else. Because when you're talking about water, clean air, and energy, why would you not do these things if you live right here as well? And if you're still going to be exposed to these toxins too, maybe not as quick as other people, but eventually, are you okay with killing your own self? And so you got to think about, for me, the mental health of people. And I think that some people were, as they grew up, they were just taught profit, money, profit, money. And so that's all their mind thinks of. They say, okay, I got hired for this job and I have to make profit. And so that's all they think about. They thought about their children gonna wash up dying. They don't even think about that. Their only thought is profit. And so, and this is the sadistic part of it. They'll say, okay, well, I gotta do something to make myself not look as sleazy. So I'm gonna fund this organization to clean up whatever the pipeline needs. And this is great because I'm giving people, I'm employing people, and I'm showing that I have some type of heart. It is a mental illness. And there is no other excuse for that type of behavior. So I'm gonna just put it on being mental illness, but we have to make sure that we continue to amplify those things, and even in our spare time, still work together on other issues and pushing them.
Thank you. We have another question.
Actually, I didn't have a question. I wanted to help with that. It's the system that's mentally ill. Corporations by law are bound to make profit. We need to change the aspect of how we look at corporations. Corporations should no longer be considered entities. They should be considered businesses. If we consider them businesses and we take away the law that says they have to make profit, people are now no longer bound to the law that says you've got to make profit, but then conscience comes back in, and you put a conscience in a business. And so then you have people that can stand up and say, no, we won't do this, even if it makes us profit. Right now, by law, if it makes profit, they have to do it. It's unfortunate, it's sick, but that's the law. We need to change that law.
We're going to bomb a country and then we're going to send aid to make it right. So let's add warmongering to the list of injustices. We have a question up here.
The unifying problem we have, I see newer activists coming in and saying, hey, I see a problem, I'm gonna build something. And then people who've been working in that same lane for 10 years going, will you stop messing up what I'm doing? And then taking credit for the success after the fact. That's one thing. Another is like eminent domain, for example, regarding the pipeline. There was eminent domain exercised in Roanoke, Virginia. They took black-owned businesses and homes along the 10th Street corridor, and the people in that community are livid that there is so much anger and support for the people who are having, the white people in Roanoke County, who are having their property taken by eminent domain because of Dominion. And those are just things that happen, right? So my question is, how do we work together when there's so much resentment and anger? Because we need to recognize that we made mistakes, and I don't think the person on the mountaintop in Roanoke County is going to say, oh yeah, I made a mistake, necessarily to the person who I just met yesterday who talked to me about this. You know what I mean? But somehow we need to acknowledge that there are mistakes made, but we still have to, like, the greater good, the justice first aspect of all of this showing up when it's not our particular pet issue, like how everything is connected. But how do you do that when you're talking about, like, I just randomly meet somebody and what do I say to convince them, or how do we unite?
I'm sorry, Deborah, can I answer a question?
I'm kind of loud enough. The National Lawyers Guild is something that all of us should be a part of. And that's because they push public interest lawyering, which every law school hates to grow up a public interest lawyer. So when you're talking about public interest lawyering, those are the lawyers that are going to speak up for these type of issues. And also we got to encourage lawyers to go outside of the box when it comes to law. They just go by what they were taught and that's it. There's other ways to do things with law, but they don't encourage independent thinking. And because you are a member of this bar association, which is basically a membership, you are bound to them first. And so we need to actually get rid of the bar association, which would allow a lot of these lawyers to do what it is that they need to do. Because it balances them, it keeps them. So to answer your question, eminent domain was supposed to be only a function of that government can use. How in the heck Dominion was able to borrow that eminent domain from the state was mind-boggling to me. I even wrote a letter to the editor about this. They should not have been able to use eminent domain as a corporation or as a business period. Especially when the people were saying we don't want this. You know, so if we had more special interest lawyers, we would have been able to
But the thing that I'm wondering is like the people who are angry because there's not unity against the pipeline because there's a lot of resentment towards folks who are getting attention for their eminent domain problem today that weren't, and others who were not getting attention from people before. And then my bigger question is how do we
keep them focused on the issue
bring
and
people together?
Tell them that by getting angry at the little small things, divert you away from the bigger issue. And we got to keep in mind, there's always going to be those things that separate us. But if we stay focused on the bigger thing, that is what we have to do for the moral good.
Whether it's justice here, even
Right.
if it's not justice there.
We have another question. Thank you for that exchange.
Yeah, this question is one of the political. When we look at the way politics is now, you have on the right conservatives almost a solid block of how they're going to go with their intentions and what they want to do. When you look on the left, as we like to define the left, you have, it's kind of messy. You have neoliberalism, you have progressives, and you have some people in the Democratic Party say we can't be about identity politics anymore. We have to start to look at how we can win back those people who left us. And that may include being more supportive of corporate interests to create jobs. How do you, with your messaging, combat that? Because on one hand, every time we talk about these injustices, people say we don't want to really hear that. We're talking about jobs, and we want jobs. So how do we go forward and try to deal with that?
When you're talking about jobs, the United States have created some over 600,000 jobs. So they're saying that the job market, unemployment is the lowest it has been since 2000. But when you look at the unemployment rate, you got to consider ALEC, which is a group of workers that are employed but still can't afford to take care of their needs. So when we are addressing we want jobs, I think that the bigger thing to address is that we want a living wage. Because the jobs are there, but you have things that bar you from having access because the employer said they want to be able to hire the people that they want. And so you have these bars, whether it's people have criminal background records, don't have enough education but have the experience, things like that. When you're dealing with politics, and this is going to be a big one, and I'm pushing forward, it's time to get rid of the parties and start dealing with the issues. That is what divides us, Democrat and Republican, and you have to sell half of your soul because you are a Democrat, but you got to get in office to get a little win. If we deal with the issues, then that is what is going to solve those things, and we have to start finding these candidates that are issue-based candidates and push them and support them to run so we can start to dismantle both of them. If we're going to deal with bipartisanism, then both parties should be doing what's right for the well-being of the state and of America. I don't even understand how this thing work without them saying we don't care about the low income and the middle income people, we just care about the rich, which is what they should be saying, then we'll definitely know instead of having to assume. But everybody should be working together for the well-being of both, so we should be ridiculing both sides right now, and I mean really bashing both sides for the mess that they are doing is absolutely ridiculous. And so if they want any votes, we should be telling them what they need to be doing.
Thank you. Would any of the panelists like to, Reverend?
A problem I have when you talk about the Democrats, let's say. To me, the conservatives are much more passionate about protecting their base, and they do everything they need to do for their base. The Democratic Party, to me, everything they ask for so little, because it's almost like we don't really matter that much. And they want some of that corporate money too. So they're trying to play in a way two sides. When you look at predatory lending, for example, now even Mark Warner was sort of looking at trying to go along with what, 200% and 300% for a $200 loan. That's criminal.
Yes, right. Yes, it is.
But they're trying to play both sides, and to me, that's the problem that we face, and we have to make them own. If they're going to say they're for justice and they're for the people, then they have to do that with passion.
We got another question.
You know, in terms of
Dr. Boykin Sanders, New Testament professor. That must be a prophetic word.
must be, let's see, not so much a question as a comment or an observation. This is an archaeological discussion we are having here. An archaeology discussion that is origins, how things have come to be what they are, you know, and what we're dealing with here. How come these things are what they are? How come this is the way it is? Why are we talking this way? And sometimes we are dealing with symptomatic issues when we are dealing with these things and not seeing the deep structures of what we are talking about. My sister on the right, she was talking about the whole matter of what concerns her, and it may not be that her focus has been a certain way because this has hit her in a certain way, and she may not have been concerned about other groups of people. As such, the comment was made. I'm thinking about this country. This is a Native American country. And what happened in history that dismantled their civilization. And what we now as beneficiaries and people who are picking up, in some sense, what is left as destroyed and trying to deal with it in terms of justice. Sometimes what we talk about as justice is no more than what is left at the crime scene. The crime scene itself, the residuals of the crime scene. And so we want a piece of this, we want a piece of that. But the real deep questions are never raised about what this is that we are dealing with. And that concerns me deeply, it's been concerning me. I've lived on both sides of the water. I grew up in South Carolina. I grew up in segregation. And now we're on this side of the river. And there are some deep concerns. One such concern for me, as I sit here today and listen, is basically, let's say an institution like VCU. You talk about justice. What are we going to do about VCU? Since that's a question. There are more than 50% of the people, and this gives me a chance to make my comment. 50% of the people of Richmond basically are black people or more. Does VCU represent the community in which it serves. Professorships and all, students, administrators, all of this. I'm talking about the residuals of the crime scene now. In fact, you sometimes feel that to be in VCU as a minority is to be there. You know, folks are asking you, why are you here? How did you get here? When in fact 50% of the people of Richmond are black. If you talk about the University of Virginia, that's a different kind of community. But Norfolk State or Virginia State, they do not have the resources of the University of Virginia. This is what we're dealing with. It's deep. It's a crime scene. And that's what we need to be thinking about. My sister, I invite you to think about the native people of America. I invite you also to think about the Palestinian people. And all people who have been abused all over the world. Not only black people, but others as well. The Palestinian situation in Israel is terrible. And we should call Israel out for what Israel really is. Not a chosen people. If they got to be chosen, is a kind of cover for the crime that is being committed against the Palestinian people. That is what we need to do. And so justice, listen, I come back to the justice question. I came here today because I think somebody want to do something right. You know what I mean? Somebody wants to do. I've been working on these issues, Hunter knows. For the longest, I guess that's why he called out my name today. Other than my presence here. We've been working on it for a long, long time. But this is our issue. We got to do something even with the stuff that we are sitting around every day and we're part of it and participating in it. VCU is a case of a crime scene. I want to say that I hope y'all don't put this out. Listen to this. It's a part of a crime scene. If you go to school, if you think about it, when this kind of school exists in our neighborhood, and 50% of the people of this community are black people. Just think about it. Talk about environmental justice and so on and so on. This is annoying to me that this is the case. When others can get a piece of the crime scene and others, some can and others cannot. And I ask you to deeply think about the native people of America, the most abused people on earth. And we are behaving as if this is not an issue. We move beyond that. We're talking about what is left of the crumbs that fell from the table. That's the way I talk. Oh, I just want to say one more thing. When I came to Virginia, Hunter and myself, we went to school in Massachusetts. Rodney Hunter. We were in school there together. I came to Virginia to teach. And I want to say this. Many schools offered me jobs. I have been at Virginia Union now for 35 years as a professor. Cornell comes to VCU and he points me out, say, this professor here, he has been here for 35 years. My degree is a PhD from Harvard. but I refuse to teach at VCU. Because I have to make up my mind as to how I'm going to live my life in this world. I don't teach there, not because I have not been offered a job there. It's because God has called me to teach among those despised and rejected in this institution. And I just cannot do that without understanding that the people who need me most, or needed me most then, they were here. And all of these institutions, you have to ask the same question. Where are you going to put your life? And if it is justice, then let's do justice. But let's do the deep stuff of justice. Not just the stuff that is the residuals, but I'm talking about getting to the deep, deep stuff where people, centuries before we are here, what happened here? What happened here is the stuff that we really gonna have to deal with and confront and face. And it takes a whole lot of nerve. And to be out there on the battlefield like Rodney Hunter. Many people don't talk about Rodney. They don't even know, many of them, that he is around. But that's all he does every day, justice. He's working on this every day. I know him. For the longest. God bless you, my brother. You have been on the battlefield for a long time.
And beyond the scheduled stop that we have now. The call to action, is that Reverend Woodbury? Kate, is Kate here?
Wow, that's a tough act to follow. I'm going to come back over here by this beautiful piece of artwork. It is such an honor to be a part of the program today. It's clear that there is so much work still to be done. And I think there are many, many ways in which we can undertake this work together, but I am thrilled to be a part of this group that is working to build a platform that all of our issues can come together around. My name is Kate Adelson. I'm the director of the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is a very long-standing environmental organization, as some of you may know. We are based right here in Richmond, Virginia, and have been trying to work across lines of difference for some time to get at the heart and the root of many of these common challenges that we face that lie beneath the surface issues that we often tackle on a day-to-day basis. My personal background is in cultural anthropology and in grassroots community organizing on both economic and environmental issues at the nexus of human rights, civil rights, worker rights, and public health, among other things. I've spent the last 9 years with the Sierra Club here in Virginia working on our issues, but also working to address cultural competency, collaboration across diversity, and policy change through empowerment. And I'm really humbled by what I heard from the panel and from the discussion earlier, and I hope that there will be more conversation amongst everyone, because I know there are a lot of great ideas here today. I think it's really important to share that we're committed to organizing at the Sierra Club in a way that honors the Jemez principles. I'm not sure if that's something that everyone is familiar with, but I do think that it's important to recognize the history. There has been a lot of work done in this arena in the past that we can learn from, and the Jemez principles were developed by a diverse group of organizations that were trying to come together to work on addressing issues related to capitalism and our international trade policies. And there's just a lot of value in those. And so we are committed to working using those principles to engage in communities, to respect local norms, and ensure that we are allowing people to speak for themselves and have input from community leaders that really celebrate the differences of diversity rather than minimalizing them. The work that we do at the Virginia chapter is supported by the National Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign, Beyond Dirty Fuels campaign, Ready for 100, Green Transportation, and Healthy Communities. And some of you may know our founder, John Muir. He said many, many, many years ago, when we try to pick out one thing, anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And I think that these words certainly speak to the purpose of this tour, that the root causes of injustice and oppression are interconnected, and therefore, so must be the solutions. One of the systems that props up injustice in our country is our energy system. It's a system that thrives off of and perpetuates racial and economic inequality. And the same special interests that are polluting our communities are polluting our democracy, as was mentioned before. There is a lot of work being done right now to confront the dirty power and dirty politics of Dominion, as you heard before, the company behind the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. There's also a lot of fantastic work going on with the Environmental Justice Advisory Council that's been created by the government of the state of Virginia. And I think because I have limited time, I just want to note that this is a space that has already seen a lot of great progress in having diverse groups that tackle very different issue areas coming together. And so I hope to continue to see that. Because really, we all know that a strong, sustainable economy depends on social stability and environmental health. So I'd just like to wrap up by sharing a little bit about the campaign, 100% Virginia campaign, which there's more information on a table outside about. This is just one of many initiatives that we hope to use to bring these various areas of justice work together. And this work, excuse me, I thought I might have more time. This work is really about ensuring that we achieve a vision of a more just and equitable society that's powered by 100% renewable energy. 100% Virginia is locally led and distributed campaign, which means that anyone, anywhere can decide to launch and lead one, and we have a team that will work to support and amplify local solutions. We're looking for local partners to engage in those, and it really is important that we help people to understand that the vision that we all have for a just world, for one that is healthy and our communities and families can be healthy, is one that is feasible. We can do it. We absolutely have the power. And I appreciate everyone who's spoken today about the power, people power that we have when we come together. To date, as some of you may know, over 75 cities and towns across the United States have already made a commitment to shift to 100% clean energy. And we're hoping that more of our cities and towns here in the state of Virginia will do the same. We'd be excited to partner with anyone who's interested in working on this initiative and are very, very interested in hearing the other ideas of campaigns and initiatives that we have to build off of the Justice First platform. Thank you all for being here today.
Panelists, and thank every one of you for coming out. And this is not an event. Okay, this is not a mobilization. That is one of the things that we do far too often. We should bring people together. We should mobilize so that people can go back and organize. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so as we continue the tour, we want you to continue the conversation. We want you to continue to discuss how you can work together under the big tent of Justice First. And so I want to lift up a very special person who has already made a commitment to continue this conversation, this discussion, and the work. And I want her to just stand up for a moment, the amazing Dr. Faith Harris, who has made a commitment to continue conversation around the Justice First Tour, as the folks are doing in Raleigh, as they're doing in Charlotte. We just had Reverend Rodney Sadler last week convened another group to get together to discuss how we can continue to do this work. And so I've been tasked with the call to action. How do we leave this place and we take action? First of all, people in my faith tradition, we're going to ask you to do what we call a prophetic call of hope. We don't want to just go out and tell people about all the problems, all the disasters, all the dismay. Because we have people who face daunting challenges every day. We have folks who work for Walmart, Olive Garden, Barnes and Nobles, who literally don't know how many hours they're going to work a week until the schedule comes out. I have congregants who one week they work 32 hours, never more, so you can't get benefits. Another week you work 15 hours. Another week you work 5 hours. And I've seen occasions where people are not scheduled to work at all for a week. And so people don't need to hear the doom and gloom. They need to hear prophetic call of hope. Because that's when people really rally. When someone like Reverend Adam Clayton Powell says, keep the faith, baby. When Martin Luther King Jr. says, we shall overcome. When Reverend Jesse Jackson says, I am somebody. When Barack Obama says, yes, we can. And so we have to make sure that our call is one of hope, one of encouragement. And we want to encourage you to not only continue the dialogue, the discussion, but to march together, to walk together, to petition together, to support one another in all of the work that's being done in Richmond, and to expand this group of people so that we bring others in. We also want to ask you to support 3 regional documents or pieces that we're advocating throughout the South. One has already been discussed, Sierra Club's Ready for 100 campaign. We want to encourage all of our municipalities to move away from fossil fuels and to move towards clean, renewable energy. We want to be able to create jobs for people. And we're not talking about bringing back the kind of jobs that give people black lung disease and remove our mountaintops. We want to encourage you to support Dogwood Alliance's forest resolution. Because if the scientists are right, then the hurricanes are going to become more frequent. Sea level rise will intensify. The flooding will become worse. And if we let profiteers come and diminish our forests, which are our natural protection, then even more people are going to suffer and die. We want people to support what we in South Carolina are pushing to be put on our ballot as a referendum. An environmental bill of rights. Because we all have the right to what? Clean land, clean air, and clean water. So those are our regional asks, and we ask that you support those things. And also, in September, when the People's Climate March takes place in California, and we have people from all across the globe come together to talk about the impacts of climate change, we want to encourage you to do side events. We want to encourage you to have side marches, etc. And then, the most important thing of all, voter engagement. We want to take people to the polls in November. And not just to vote for anyone, But we have to make our politicians accountable. Ask them whether or not they support your Justice First issue. Ask them what they have done to support your Justice First issue. And if they can't answer, and if they are doing nothing, then I say turn them out so that we can reclaim the People's House and the State House and the State Senate and all of these places where we're supposed to be represented. And then last but not least, we will have a convening in November or December with representatives from across all 10 states in the South that will be visiting. And we're going to bring folks together, either electronically or face-to-face, so we can talk about how we will leverage what we have birthed, how we can move forward in 2019, 2020, and beyond. And so we have a simple request, that we all lift up the same words, that we all lift up the same concept, that we all say day to day after we leave this place what we are about to say now. Justice first. Justice first. Say it like you mean it. Justice first. Justice first. Say it so they can hear you out there. Justice first. Justice first. Say it so even Trump has to hear it. Justice first. Justice first. Justice first. Justice first. Victory is ours. God bless you. Heaven keep you. And we shall win. This is what democracy looks like. Thank you.
Everybody, so glad you could be here. I'm Andrea Miller. I'm Executive Director of People Demanding Action. We're the group that we generally kind of make it a point that nobody has ever heard of us because we are the people's lobbyists on Capitol Hill. We are there every week, and we also are beginning to lobby in the State House. We are a justice organization, and basically what we do for the people who address the issue, we fight neoliberalism, which in so many instances takes something that's a really bad idea and pretend that it's a good idea, and then they sell it to us. One of the things my mother told me when I was a little girl is, whenever somebody tells you something, before you decide you're going to swallow it and do it, consider the source. Many of the sources of neoliberal ideas literally came right out of the Heritage Foundation. They've been marketed, they've been packaged, and now they're being regurgitated as progressive ideals. So one of the things that we fight for when we're fighting on climate is we are an EJ organization. So we oppose very strongly things like carbon pricing, cap and any of those things, because it's basically paid up poison. We support keep it in the ground. Leave it there. All right? No, there is no reason why the richest corporations on earth, we're going to charge them a fine. And these are also the most powerful corporations on earth, so they're going to just pass that fine right back to us and make us pay it. In what world is this justice? It isn't. All right, so anyway, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming events. So there are a number of things that we are going to want to do to be active. Today, there's going to be a Richmond Speak Out for Prison Justice. It'll be 3:30 at the Second Baptist Church on the West End. All right, it ends at 3:30. Okay, so we're going to need to run. We're going to go over there. The Poor People's Campaign is beginning in Virginia. So I'm going to invite everybody that's here to join us. On Sunday from 5:30 to 8:30 at 7th Street Christian Church, we view the live stream from Reverend Barber and Reverend Liz. So on the 14th, they began their 40 days of action. So this week, I want to get this right. The National Call for Moral Revival is about systemic racism and voter suppression, how it's connected to political majorities, poverty, immigration injustice, school resegregation, mistreatment of indigenous communities, xenophobia, and Islamophobia. I do have brochures, so I would like to invite anybody or flyers that would like to go to DC and participate in the actual events in DC. And then we also have a schedule on the flyer of when the events are going to be. If you have any questions at all on the Poor People's Campaign, you can just send an email to Virginia, spell it out, at poorpeoplescampaign.org. And we also need to look at, Reverend Woodbury already mentioned the September People's Climate March. One of the other things that People Demanding Action does is we do a lot with voting. So if there are any people who would like to be trained in registering voters, I am one of the few people outside the State Board of Elections that does voter registration training. We can do it by webinar so that people don't need to travel. There are 179,000 unregistered people in Virginia. There are 44,000 people in Virginia who, if they do not vote in the 2018 election, will be removed from the rolls. We know the numbers, we have the names, we have the phone numbers. So I also built phone banks where we can contact the unregistered voters and invite them to register. We are launching a texting service so that we can reach younger people who text and invite them to register to vote via text message, at which point they will be reminded of when the elections are. Voter registration closes on October 15th, so we do have a while. And the last event, on May 29th, there will be a pipeline event in Union Hill. Union Hill is where they're building the compressor station. It's a historically African-American town built by former slaves. So of course, many wants to put a compressor station there. All right, and is Frank James here? Oh, there he is.
I just first want to start off by saying how grateful I am to be at this Justice event. I can't describe how much I've learned since I've been here. So special shout out to Kendall, working the sound in the back for inviting me. And I have nothing else to say but definitely putting justice first. And I know that we talked about a lot of things, but I definitely believe that change is going to come, and I believe that wholeheartedly.
Just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gon' come. Yes, it will. It's been too hard living, and now I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's out there beyond the sky.